Welcome everyone. This is CE461 Computer Applications in Foundation Engineering. This is MATLAB session 3.1, and in this specific session we will be talking about the control structures. If you remember, last time we discussed if and switch statements. In today's agenda we are going to be talking about the repetitive structures as part of control structures. These are simply for loops and while loops. We will also be talking about some built-in functions and prompt programs. Okay. Repetitive structures, if you remember last time we were discussing if and switch statements. These repetitive structures are different ones because they are used to execute the number of statements more than one time. Basically, you don't have to write the statement multiple times. In MATLAB we have two different repetitive structures. One of them is the for loop, the other one is the while loop. These are simply doing iterative operations. Okay. Let's take a look at the simplest for loop. The basic format of the for loop is starting with for keyword and it ends with and keyword, and we have the index and we have start, increment and stop. If you remember, this is basically an incrementing methodology, and inside the for loop we have the statement. Okay. Now start, increment and stop, and in between those we have column over here. So you remember this from MATLAB from the last time, I guess. Here we might have the increment value as -1. For example, we can say index is equal to 10 minus 2 to 4, which simply decrements starting from 10 until 4 with a value of 2. So basically these values are going to be 10, 8, 6 and 4. If increment is omitted, then the step value is simply 1 by default. If it is positive, the increment is positive, the loop won't be executed if the start is greater than the stop, and if the increment is negative, the loop won't be executed if start is less than stop. Okay, and if start equals stop, the loop will be executed only once. That is an important point to remember, and I don't recommend using the increment value as not an integer, because this will cause round-off errors. So definitely you should avoid using such not an integer value. Okay, so let's take a look at a simplest for loop. We have a variable named sum is equal to 0, and for n is equal to 1 to 10, sum is equal to sum plus n, and at the end of this script we have this sum basically displaying the sum of the integers from 1 to 10. Okay, now this is the simplest for loop. Before going to the while format of this, let's take a look at the simplest for loop. Let's run this sum for. Okay, so it basically sums the values from 1 to 10. Please take a look at the details of the script. So let's run the script. Now, if you remember from the last time, if I press F10, I will skip the lines. So I'm gonna put step. So I completed 1, I completed 2, I completed 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 iterations, and then at the end of this we are going to display the sum. Okay, so that is the idea. I'm sure everybody is familiar with for loops from the previous classes. Okay, so let me further continue with the while loops. Here the basic form of the while loop is given. I have the logical test. Of course, the while loop starts with while and ends with and keywords. These are reserved words. and I have the logical test. In case the logical test is true, then the statements inside the while loops are executed. Okay, the while loop, is going to continue until this logical test is terminated. Okay, so the basic difference between for and while loop, in while loop, since the logical test is terminated because when the specific condition is satisfied, you may not know the number of passes in advance. However, in for loop, since you have start and stop and you know the increment value, you can easily calculate the number of times that this for loop is going to run. In the case of while loop, the logical test is, as long as it's satisfied, the statements are run. However, when this logical test is terminated, then you don't run the statements anymore. So the number of passes in while loops is not known in advance. Okay. For while loops, we have the loop variable. That is an important one. The loop variable must have a value before the while statement is executed. And this loop variable, of course, needs to be changed somehow by the statements within the loop. This is the most critical part of the while loop. We need to have a loop variable. Okay? Now let's take a look at the example altogether. This was the previous example written for while loop. So I have sum is equal, is initiated as 0, and I have the loop. As you see, this is the loop variable. I have the loop variable m is equal to 1, and the logical test says that when m is less than or equal to 10, you're going to increment the sum, plus you will increment the loop variable. If you don't put this one inside your statements, then this value or this while loop is going to run infinitely. Alright? So this is the same thing. Basically, it does the same action as the for loop. Here we have the loop variable, and I'm incrementing or decrementing or simply changing the value of loop variable inside the statement. So this is the simple difference. Let's take a look at the sum while over here. So let me run this. I have step while m is less than 1. Look at this value of m. M is 1. It is initiated. Then since m is less than 10, I'm going to increment the values of sum. Okay, increment the values of sum as long as m is less than 10, less than or equal to 10. Okay, so when this is, okay, let me go until 10. Okay, so m is now 10 and the sum is equal to 15. Now this is the last time that m is going to run, the while loop is run, because m is now 11, which is simply greater than 10. So the loop is going to be terminated and then the sum is displayed. Okay? Alright. Again, while loops, there are advantages when the termination decision is based on the results. For this one, I will be talking about a function named createSeries, which simply takes an input argument x and it creates a row vector as output, and this a vector consists of exponentially increasing values of x such that the elements are x to the 1, x to the 2, x to the 5, and it stops when the summation of the elements exceeds 100. Okay, let's take a look at this createSeries example. I have the function, and this function returns the output vector a, and it takes input argument as x. Okay, now here we are going to be setting the summation, we are going to be setting the summation to 0, which is basically we are initiating the summation, and we are incrementing idx as variable. If you remember, this is simply the loop variable, and please note that for each element of A, as long as the sum and x to the power of that element is less than 100, we are going to be incrementing, or we are going to be running the while loop. Basically, this sum is updated first, and then we are storing the new element in array A, and then we are incrementing the loop variable. So let's say, let me clear my screen. I have A is equal to create series, let's say 2. Okay, so in this case, it seems like I have 5 elements. Let me run this for you. Let me debug this for you. And let's make this simpler. Create series. This time, let's choose 4. Okay, so this will make our life easier when debugging. It will be shorter, I guess. So first, I'm initiating the loop variable, and I'm initiating the sum elements. Okay, and here, so I first calculated the sum, and then I assign a value of 4 to A, the vector A, and then still this is less than 100, so I'm adding up to 20. I'm having another element 16 over here, which is 4 to the 2, and then the next element is 4 to the 3, right? So let's see, sum is still less than 100, okay, and then we have 64. It seems like the summation of all these elements is still 84. I said 64, I'm sorry. That was the last element in A, and the sum is 84. Let me further continue. It seems like the sum is sum plus 4 to the idx, which is 4 to the 4, is greater than 100, then I'm ending up the while loop. So I'm terminating the while loop over here. So I have 4, 16, and 64. Okay, so this is an example. I want you to work on this example by yourself. Please, this is a warning considering the exam standpoint of view. Okay, now next week there may be a coding competition to write this without using a while loop. You can think of this as an example. Okay, you can think of this as an assignment, let's say, not an example. Alright, so this is so far the for loop and while loop, and let's talk about some useful built-in function. As I promised before, I have SUMX function sums the values in a vector. Let's say I have, let me clear my screen, and okay, let me write down sum 1 to 10. Okay, index exceeds the number of array elements. So what might be the reason? MATLAB is giving us a warning. Sum appears to be both a function and a variable. Okay. Oh, by the way, before we doing that, why do you think it is not running? Let's take a look at the sum itself. I have the variable sum and I have the function sum. So as long as you have something in your workspace as variable name, and if you are using this, if you are somehow using variable name, the same name as the function name, then MATLAB is going to give you an error over there. Okay, and here let's try to remove sum, clear sum. And then let's run this example again. It seems like I have 55 as the summation of numbers from 1 to 10. So please be careful about this usage of, let's say, misusage of variable names. Okay. So this was last year's exam question, I guess. Anyways, let's talk about this sum. I have sum, let's say, oh, okay, pardon me. I have n is equal to, what is it? Let's see. N is equal to from 1 to 5 and from 6 to 10. Let's see. It seems like I have 2 by 5 matrix, and if I use sum n, it seems like basically the matrices are summed with respect to their columns first and rows next. So 1 plus 6, 2 plus 7, 3 plus 8, 4 by 4 plus 9, and 5 plus 10. So my message over here is that there are some built-in functions. We need to be familiar with those, and we need to know the details of those built-in functions. You can use either help or internet, but as you see, they are somehow defined in MATLAB this way. This is just one example of sum. You can try different versions. Sum n, sum n1. So this is basically giving you a direction of addition. You can also use a similar function, which is mean, and this basically does the same thing for you. Okay. Now let's talk about requesting input from user. We are talking about simply prompt programs. Okay. Now let's take a look at this example. I have x is equal to input, which is a function, prompt, comma, s. Okay. Now the syntax is single quotes, which means the statement prompt is going to be a string, and this comma s indicates that there is going to be a string prompt on the screen. Okay. Now let's take a look at a specific example. I have response is equal to input, code, do you want to continue, yes or no. This bracket means if you don't specify anything, then this will be taken as yes, and s is simply going to be indicating it's a string. So is empty, if you remember, this was the function that we defined in the previous class, and if the response is empty, or if the response is y, or if the response is small case y, then the response is going to be taken as y, otherwise the response is going to be no. Let's take a look at this example. I have clear, let's say prompt screen. When I type in this, MATLAB is going to ask me, do you want to continue? Yes or no? If you don't specify anything, I will take it as y, which is yes. Okay. So let me write down no. So the response is no, because this is none of those answers. Okay. Small case, lowercase, uppercase, or empty. Let me run the prompt screen again, and let me just press return. So basically it's an empty response, so it will be taken as y. Okay. So I have this example as prompt. In other words, if you type in, for example, x is equal to input print something, okay, and comma, this is string, so print something, it will return an empty array. Okay, now the last example is just for you to work on. This is an interesting way to use a for loop. Please try to understand this. This is also going to be an assignment for you. I have n defined as 1 to 5 and 6 to 10, and sum is equal to 0. For k is equal to n, sum is equal to sum plus k first and k second. Please run this at home by yourself. This is basically a for statement, and the index variable this time is not a vector but a matrix. So the operations within the loop are executed by using a whole column in each step. Okay, so this is sum for. Let me actually clear everything and then let me run this. So I have sum for, but this is an interesting way of calculating anything for loop. I have n sum, and for k is equal to 1, let me actually continue. For k is equal to 1, sum is equal to from k1, k2. So let me just show you what is k1. This is k2, so it's going to be 7 this time. So please try to understand the logic behind this. Here we are working row-wise and column-wise operations. Okay, so this is an important thing to remember, especially for your future life purposes. The operations within the loop are executed using a whole column in each step. Please study this example at home by yourself and make sure that you debug this code. Alright, in this specific session we talked about repetitive structures, we talked about some built-in functions, and finally we touched the concept of prompt programs. I appreciate your time. You can always send us an email to ask your questions. Thank you.